Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus, episode 180, the review for Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the North, South, East and West, and welcome to another episode of Film Focus. I'm your host, the Hypersonic55, and I'm glad you decided to join me once again for some film-related discussion. And today we are talking about the fourth entry in the Beverly Hills Cop series, Axel F. Now, I have been looking forward to this film for quite some time. It's been years of ifs, maybes that this film might actually come around, and we've had certain directors attached in the past. We found out this film might have gotten made in the late 2000s or maybe in the 2010s, and there was even that weird TV show version that they were going to try and do which focused on Axel's son as opposed to him, but that never really got off the ground. And for a while I was starting to think, oh, there's no hope. But when Eddie Murphy started to go back to some of his previous roles, like the sequel to Coming to America, I was like, okay, maybe Axel might be coming back in a new entry. And of like his previous notable films that made him the superstar that we know right now, the Beverly Hills Cop series is one where I'm just like, you know what? I would like to see another entry just to see if we could get that bad taste of Beverly Hills Cop 3 out of our mouths. So yeah, obviously before I get into talking about Axel F, I just need to give you a little bit of my history with the franchise. Now, being born in the 90s, I wasn't around to experience the first film in its prime. And I actually can't remember when I got around to watching it for the first time, but I feel like it must have been around the early 2010s, either just before, during, or after my time at university. But I'll never forget how I felt watching Beverly Hills Cop for the first time. That 1984 film is a classic for a reason. It's a buddy cop film with all the laughs, action, fun, and a compelling story, and has a banging soundtrack and wonderful performances from everybody involved, especially Eddie Murphy at the center of everything, creating one of the most memorable performances of his career. And I've watched that film several times since the initial viewing, and it never gets old. It always makes me smile. When that film starts up and you hear the heat is on, you just smile. And there's something so special about 80s films specifically that just have a film open on a good song. It sets the mood for the rest of the film, and that one does it perfectly. And the funny thing is, with the sequels, I actually hadn't watched them until very recently. I'd been meaning to check them out for a while just because I was curious to see what happened after the first film. And since I knew that the sequels weren't as well regarded, sometimes you're just curious to know, okay, how bad is it? And with this new film on the horizon, I just wanted to know, okay, how does Axel F compare to entries 2 and 3? So I ended up watching them recently, and while they don't hold a candle to the original, I would say there is some merit to be found in both films, more so the second one. So yeah, with Beverly Hills Cop 2, it feels like almost a carbon copy of the original, hitting a lot of the same beats as the first film, but changing a handful of elements with the plot, characters, and trying to go for a bigger equals better approach. And admittedly, there's a fair amount to like with the film because of the charm of the cast. Just seeing Axel, Rosewood, and Taggart together still feels good. The music is still really good with a pretty solid soundtrack, and obviously Harold Faltermeyer's score being utilized throughout the film, just like the first one. That sound never gets old. And just being back in that world with the action, the humor, and just seeing how things have progressed since the last one was pretty good. And to my surprise, I totally forgot that Tony Scott made this film. I must have forgotten about this, but I think I remember reading after he passed away that this was part of his filmography. So I was like, oh, well, I definitely need to see it. I just never got around to seeing it until a few weeks ago. And yeah, the film is competently made, but it just doesn't hit the same as the first film. And then comes number 3. the film I dreaded to go back to because I'd heard about how bad it was, and I'd even seen some of the behind the scenes drama through YouTube videos that recapped, the dreaded process of trying to get this film made. And even though it had John Landis involved, who was a pretty accomplished director at the time, even he couldn't save this film from the train wreck that it was because of the script changes, how him and Eddie Murphy clashed, and how they came up with a script that was, Die Hard in a theme park, but then just reapplied it to Beverly Hills Cop 4. But then when you get to this end product, you can see that it's just a jumbled mess of ideas that just doesn't come together cohesively. They at least tried to do some different things with the stakes and setting it in a unique location. And, a lot of these ideas on paper sound good, but in execution, it's a very rough watch. It feels sanitized, like it's lost its edge and cool factor, and what you're left with is a film that feels like a pale imitation of what came before, with tonal inconsistencies, weak humor, unsatisfactory action, and even Axel finding himself in scenarios that just doesn't feel like it's in his wheelhouse. You can see that Eddie Murphy's trying in this film, but he just doesn't have that fire in him like he did in the previous ones. And while there are some odd bits that I liked, like the return of Rosewood and Surge, seeing John Saxon there for some random reason, that was always good. And the random cameo from George Lucas, which was just like, what? Okay, but that's about it. Even the score, which is something that I praised in the first two films, just wasn't quite the same. And the crazy thing was, it was made by Nile Rodgers, one of my favorite musicians in the history of life. And I love pretty much everything that he's ever done. But this film's, the score that he made for this is just a little weird. The Axel F theme song has been turned into almost like it feels like a militaristic, superhero-y kind of feel with this sort of upbeat orchestrated sound to it, which it's all right, but it doesn't quite work. And some of the other versions sound like it has like a early 90s R&B poppy kind of sound to it, which just doesn't sound right. Some of it sounds okay, but it just doesn't hit the same. And the soundtrack overall has a lot of R&B stuff in there, which is, it's okay, but it just doesn't seem to have that right kind of energy and doesn't give you that oomph that the previous two films had. So yeah, just Beverly Hills Cop 3, man. That was a painful one. So after that, I was thinking, you know what? I'd come to accept the fact that there probably wouldn't be another Beverly Hills Cop film. But over the last few years, there was some momentum, there was smoke, and then there was fire, and then we finally got a trailer. And I was like, you know what? Okay, this feels all right. But then the second trailer came out. I was like, okay, I'm kind of vibing with it. And then the film released. And even though I'm 2 weeks late in doing my review, I'm glad that you decided to at least stick around to hear my thoughts on it, because what can I say? I liked Axel F quite a bit. This feels like the sequel that this series needed. And while it doesn't do much to reinvent the wheel in terms of this franchise, it feels like a comfortable, solid return to form that I had some good times with. And now I'm going to tell you why in this review. So as per usual, we'll talk about the story, characters, presentation, and overall conclusions. So without further ado, let's jump in. Alright, so now it's time to talk about that story, and it can be summed up as the following. We return to Detroit with Axel Foley getting up to his usual shenanigans of taking out bad guys with his own unique brand of law enforcement. However, while out there, he is contacted by his old friend Billy Rosewood, who informs him that his daughter, who is now a lawyer, is involved in a high-profile case that is threatening her life. So now Axel has to go back to Beverly Hills to see what's going on. And it just so happens that the case that his daughter is working on actually has ties to the police department of the Beverly Hills area. So John Taggart, along with Billy Rosewood, also have to join Axel to figure out what's going on with this conspiracy. And that's a way for me to summarize the plot without going into the area of spoilers. I thought the story for this film was pretty solid. It feels familiar yet different. And I feel like overall this story is what Beverly Hills Cop 3 tried to be in terms of progressing the character but still keeping a lot of those key elements intact. If you've seen a fair amount of buddy cop or action thrillers, then you'll know what the codes and conventions and tropes that this film is throwing at you. It doesn't do too much new, but I feel like it does enough to be a competent and solid like story. So the humor's still there, the action's still there, and there are some little moments here and there for the characters to breathe, have conversations, reflect on what's happened, see where they are at this point in their lives, and then admit that life has changed since the 80s. Things aren't as easy as it used to be, but there's still a need for bad guys to get their comeuppance and for the good guys to do what is necessary to get things done. So yeah, I think there were some nice themes involved in this film in terms of family members reflecting on like their past issues and trying to find a way to move forward. How important is your job when compared to, was it the responsibilities you have as a parent? You also have the police department angle where some of them reflect on how law enforcement has changed over the years, how things used to be simpler way back when, and how there are all sorts of new rules and regulations that need to be followed, and how things were, again, fairly black and white, and you pretty much understood who the good guys and bad guys were, but now that area started to become a little bit more murky, and learning who you can trust and learning where, as a corruption comes from has become just a little bit trickier to try and understand. And yeah, I thought they were all like little bits that added to the film and made it a pretty interesting watch. Again, I would say that there are some of those cozy conventions that you've seen in these films before, and some of them play out in exactly the same way that you'd expect. I did wish that they had dived a little deeper into some of these themes that they tried to go for, especially when it came to the family dynamic between Axel and his daughter, and the new police officer dude played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who I'll talk about more later on. But I would say again, this film does enough to stand on its own and be a new entry that I quite enjoy. So yeah, it acknowledges the past and definitely makes some pretty notable references to all three of the previous films, whether they are audible or visual references. And I think this film leans into nostalgia just enough, but not in a way that feels overindulgent. Some bits do feel like, okay, you didn't need to go that far, but again, in terms of films that have had 20, 30 or 40 years between like their last entry and the current entry, this one fares a lot better when it comes to its use of nostalgia. Alright, and now it's time for me to talk about the cast, and I think that they all did a pretty good job with the material that they were given with. Let's start with Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley. Firstly, can I just say, Murphy still has it. He is still fun, charming, and just, he looks like he's having a whale of a time in this role. Now, I've seen Eddie in a handful of films since he's made his acting comeback in the last few years with some of the films that he's worked on. And besides Dolomite, I don't think I've seen a film that really showcased the reasons why I enjoyed his films in the past. But this one feels like he's stepping back into a role that he is very familiar with. And while he's obviously a little older and he doesn't seem to have that same sort of crazy energy that was there, especially in the first two films, as I said before, what I like about him is that he still has that youthful energy, but he's clearly a lot older. But he's still putting himself in harm's way because that's just the nature of his character. He feels compelled to step in and, serve justice in his own unique way. And that means obviously doing things outside of the law. And while he's still up to some of his old tricks, at the same time, he acknowledges, oh yeah, sometimes this isn't going to work, so I'm just going to try a different tactic. And seeing his dynamic not only with Taggart and Rosewood again, which was great, you also get to see some new dynamics with individuals like Detective Bobby Abbott, who is played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. We also get to see this new dynamic with his daughter, Jane, who's played by Taylor Page. And also his interactions with Kevin Bacon are also pretty good. So next up is Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who plays Detective Bobby Abbott. He's basically a newer member of the Beverly Hills Police Department. And he plays a little factor in terms of not only working with Axel on this new case, but also being involved with his daughter to a degree, which you'll find out in the film. I thought Gordon-Levitt, he was good in the role. I wish that there was a little bit more done with his character, but I still feel like him and Axel had a pretty good dynamic. And Levitt's always just fun to watch in the film, so I thought, yeah, he was solid. And Taylor Page as Jane Saunders, aka Axel's daughter, she was decent. At first, I found her to be a little frustrating in terms of the way that she was written. She just came across as that like standard daughter who has an estranged relationship with her father, and it's a little like weird to see how they play out initially, but as the film goes on you start to see this new rhythm that these two have when they are forced into scenarios to work together. And I thought that she did a pretty good job in the film, so yeah, man, hats off to her, she was good. But then you have Judge Reinhold and John Aston as Billy Rosewood and John Taggart, my boys, my beautiful boys. And even though they're older now, I did enjoy seeing how far they've progressed in their like respective roles since the last entry in the series. And I won't go into detail about that because it's kind of fun just to see where those two are in the film. But I thought Reinhold and Ashton, they still have it. They have a really good dynamic with Murphy, but also with each other. I only wish that there was more time to see these guys interact together. Paul Reiser also makes a return as well, and it's always nice to see his character and see how far he's come since the original film as Jeffrey Friedman. He was pretty fun, and I did not expect it, but Bronson Pinchot, at least I hope that's how you say his name, him coming back as Surge, oh my gosh, I had no clue he was even going to be here. And I was like, yes. And his introduction had such a good choice of music as well. I'm like, this is great. I'm so happy. And finally, you have Kevin Bacon, who is Captain Cade Grant. Yeah, he's another member of the Beverly Hills Police Department. And if you've seen these kind of films and know the kind of characters that Kevin Bacon plays, you can kind of spot him from a mile off. That being said, he did his job well. I always like seeing Kevin Bacon in things, and he was pretty solid in this role. There's also just a small appearance from Louis Guzman, and I really liked his role in this film. I love seeing Guzman in most things anyway, but he showed up in an unexpected way in this film, and I was like, yep, I like that. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the presentation, and it was pretty good. Visually, this film is nice. It obviously is trying to look back and make some references to the way that the action was done in the previous films, but now they have that sort of modern / clean look about it. And I think, yeah, the visual style of this film is good. I did appreciate how they were able to add that yellow / orangey filter that was part of the visual identity of the first two films, but was also absent in the third one. And yeah, I thought that the action was solid. There was some decent car chases and destruction involved. We also had like a pretty decent firefight later on in the film. And there is also a pretty notable sequence with Axel and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in a helicopter flying all over the place through the city, which was pretty well made as well. But yeah, there's nothing in the action department that is as memorable or as unique as what came in the first two films. But I would say, again, it's pretty good, competent material that, again, is at least better than what we got in the third movie, Good Gravy. But yeah, then we have the film score, which is done by Lorne Balfe, which I was not expecting. But yeah, Lorne Balfe, I quite like his compositions, and I think he does a commendable job of taking the original compositions from Harold Faltermeyer and putting a modern / unique spin on it. Obviously, you get to hear the sounds of the Axel F theme, which obviously is a god tier theme song and has been used to great effect in the first two films with that classic sort of 80s synthy kind of sound. And this film, what Balfe has ended up doing was basically taking the idea of what like Faltermeyer did in the original, where he would take the theme but then sort of remix and rejigger it to suit certain situations. So when someone's sneaking around, there's more of a sneaky version, there's more of an energetic version when the action's happening, and then there's obviously a version that just is like the main theme playing as like Axel will just be driving around or getting up to something. But yeah, it's a new sort of musical take on it. I do feel like depending on how open you are to change, it does feel a little weird to have this sort of modern interpretation of this classic theme that we've known for like 40 plus years. But I do think, again, Bal's version of it is pretty solid. And the new theme song, where I think it's Lil Nas X has made a sort of new song centered around the theme, it's not bad, to be fair. Again, your tolerance for it will probably vary depending on how much you like modern versions of like classic themes, but I thought it was okay. And speaking of music, yeah, this film opts for a soundtrack that takes a few bits from the first two films, but then mixes it in with a bunch of different songs that's obviously come over the last few decades to fill it out. And while at times it does feel like, okay, you're literally just borrowing from the first two films because those are the super memorable songs that everybody knows, but then you get to hear some other songs that are pretty notable that showed up in the last, like, I don't know, 3 decades. And they even make note of like some of the music that's changed over the years. But yeah, I think it's a nice eclectic soundtrack of familiar stuff but new things as well. So yeah, it's all right. Okay, so now we come to the conclusion. Overall, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F was a solid time, and if you are interested in this franchise and wanted to see at least a better entry than number 3, then you're in luck. It's really fun to just be back in this world with these characters who are obviously older but still getting up to unique shenanigans and fun adventures. And after this one was over, I was like, you know what? I could probably see another one of these. I'd be open to it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Axel F. Now I turn it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think of the film? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? How do you think it holds up in regards to the previous entries? I would say if I was to rank them, I'd probably go 1, 2, 4, and 3. But there's a difference between 2 and 4 by just a smidge. But yeah, let me know what you thought about the film in the comment section below, or hit me up on Twitter where I'm at HappySunday55 or at FilmFocus55. Is that the name I got on there? Yeah, Film Focus 55, yeah. Check me out on Facebook, Instagram, SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and all other places where podcasts can be found. And yeah, that'll do it for another episode of Film Focus. Thank you for listening. And until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out. Peace.